Episode 9, Mr. Jones Called. Hi, my name is Trey and I have a scary story to share. My experience is all about the time I tried a Ouija board with a couple of my friends back in college. For the record, I don't really believe in ghosts, demons or stuff like that. We've all got cameras in our pockets at all times these days, and half the photos you see online are so out of focus or blurry, it's hard to tell what the hell they're even meant to be. The people telling the stories are usually also after money or attention, in my opinion. That's why I'm writing anonymously and have asked to have my name changed when it is read in the story. I don't really care if you believe my story or not, it's your opinion. I probably wouldn't believe it either if I wasn't there. Having said that, I do hope there are some people out there that do believe me. It might just dissuade someone enough to not have to experience what I did. Back in college, I was a typical student, into loud music, horror movies, and owned my fair share of black t-shirts. I was a fan of all things horror, as I loved the idea of a good scare. I grew up with movies like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist, The Evil Dead, Hellraiser, and all that other good stuff. Horror movies were a bit more creative back then, and certainly less sanitised. So my story really begins when myself and two good friends, Frank and Adam, started messing around with a Ouija board. We lived on campus at the time in a small hall. In total there were 6 of us on the floor, but Frank and Adam were my main friends. Adam came back one day from a flea market with the board. It wasn't even a vintage one. I'd guess around the 1970s-ish. You know, one of those mass-produced Parker Brothers ones. It certainly didn't look or feel haunted to me. We played with the boards several times over the course of a few weeks. It was at least interesting, as we did all witness the planchette move. Usually it would just go to random letters though. I seem to remember us joking at the time that we had picked up a retarded ghost. Over the course of a few weeks though, we actually started to receive more coherent messages. The supposed spirit would spell out names, places, answer yes or no to certain questions. Although it appeared impressive, I wasn't born yesterday. The guys both swore it wasn't them, and I have to believe them. They would tell me if it was. Of course, I didn't believe in the supernatural though, so just attributed it to the unconscious pushing and pulling effect. It was still interesting as an experience all the same. After a few more weeks though, the messages started to change. It went from rather innocent stuff to insults and threats. The spirit, if that's what it was, identified itself simply as Mr. Jones. Now that meant nothing to me, Adam or Frank, just some random name. Conveniently short and easy to spell, I noted. So here's where things get weird. Adam used to keep the board in his room. Now he swears that at night he could hear whispering. Our walls in the accommodation weren't exactly thick, so myself and Frank naturally told him that he was just hearing sound that had travelled, possibly from one of the other floors. A few days later, he claimed that the box containing the board fell on the floor and opened one night. He said that this had happened after hearing whispering. He was sufficiently creeped out to want to pass it on, so Frank took it and put it in one of the drawers in his room. Sure enough, Frank starts having interrupted sleep and nightmares. He told us about a shadow figure that he had seen in the corner of his room one night. Whenever he was alone, particularly at night, he felt watched. Somehow he attributed this to the board. Remember, there's no hard evidence for any of this, so I had a hard time believing it was anything other than their imaginations and expectations. As a result, I believe that they attributed anything slightly unusual to the board. After all, why jump to the conclusion of a spirit? There were so many other rational explanations. So I ended up taking the board and kept it in my room. I don't really know what to tell you, other than I did feel watched at night times, sort of a paranoid feeling. It was odd, I'll admit it. One night though, I heard a slow scratching on my door, as if someone was slowly running their nails down it. I got up and opened the door. There was just the dark corridor. At the time, I can't say that I was scared, but I was coming round to the idea that simply keeping the board was enough to cause a low level of anxiety, and in turn attribute noises and feelings of being watched to the board. So the solution was simple, just get rid of the board. And I did. I put it in the trash can outside one evening, just as any person of sound mind would. That night though, something truly weird happened, and for the life of me, I really wish I had a camera phone back then to get some evidence. It was late and I was asleep in my room. I was abruptly woken though by what I thought was someone shaking me. I opened my eyes and was stunned with fear. Standing above my bed watching me was an older man in dark clothes. He was gaunt and pale. I tried to shout out, but nothing came due to the shock. He simply continued to stare at me with wide eyes before slowly backing up and vanishing into the shadows in the corner of my room. I was genuinely shook up and went to wake Adam next door. I was so scared I asked him to stay up with me talking until the morning. I can't tell you if it was paranormal or just one of those things. Too many horror movies, not enough sleep, paranoia? I don't know, but I know that the experience was enough for me to know that I never wanted to play with a Ouija board again. After that night, nothing ever happened again. The board was gone in the trash and life went back to normal. Now if I left the story there, I'm sure you would agree that it's an odd set of events, but could all just be imagination. After I left college, myself, Adam and Frank went our separate ways. In the 10 years after, I probably only saw them a couple of times at reunions as we lived quite far apart. I was now working as an accountant for a local business. Nothing glamorous, but decent money. One night, one of my bosses invites me over to his place for a Halloween party. It was a cool house, drinks were flowing, and people were having a good time. I went in search of the bathroom. It was a large place, so it took me a few attempts of stumbling into closets and bedrooms to find it. On my way back, I heard laughter coming from a darkened room nearby, so I stuck my head around the door to see what was going on. As I did so, several people in the room jumped with surprise before bursting into laughter again. I recognised several of my co-workers, so invited myself in. I was greeted with the sight of about 5 or 6 of them playing with a Ouija board. A few more were just watching with interest. Instantly, I thought back to that time in college, something I hadn't thought about for a long time. They invited me in to play, but I declined in a light-hearted way. They were pretty insistent. The only way I could appease them was to say that I'd stay and watch for a bit. So anyway, one of the women asks the board, "Do you have a message for anyone?" The board then proceeded to spell out my name, Trey. I really thought that they were messing with me. The same woman then asked, "What is your message?" The board spelled out, "I'm still watching you." Of course, there was more laughter and some spooky ooh noises made from some of the people in the room. The woman asked the final question, "Who are you?" The board replied, "Mr. Jones." Up until now, I'd just been going along with this, but with this response, my blood went cold. I'm absolutely certain that none of the people in that room could possibly have known about my experience in college. I certainly never spoke about it. Adam and Frank lived nowhere near, and all these years later, and certainly wouldn't have any connection to my current co-workers. I smiled politely to brush it off with a half-hearted laugh. I then made my excuses to leave. To this day, I have no idea how the same name came up, but my co-workers assured me the next day that they weren't moving the planchet. Are spirits real? I'm still not certain. What I do know though is that Ouija boards are strange things, and I will never play with one of them again. How the name Mr. Jones reappeared so many years later, I will probably never know. If you enjoyed this week's paranormal story, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel for more tales of the supernatural and the unexplained. Until next time, my friends, happy hauntings.